Way back in 1975, nearly half a century ago, Dungeons and Dragons introduced the monk character into their hugely successful, wildly popular tabletop role-playing game. Therefore, the monk completely fits into and belongs in HeroQuest. Does this statement make sense? Does it hold water? And is it valid in the face of so many people who have critiqued the monk since its reveal at Gen Con this year? Welcome home, brave heroes. I am Ash, this is HeroQuest, and this is exactly what I'm going to talk about today. Before we get into that, the algorithm punishes any channel that doesn't get a lot of watch time. If you do end up watching the whole video, or at least more than you think you would normally, that helps out a ton, but only if you're interested. Thank you very much. Moving on. This video is going to be filmed in the podcast style with minimal editing. I'm not going to do a lot of visuals. It's just going to be my talking head. I will be looking at some of my miniatures, all of the ones that have come out since Avalon Hill re-released HeroQuest. Other than that, you can sit back, relax, and enjoy listening to this while you are commuting to or from work, or perhaps while you are in a painting session, which that arm looks great, by the way. You painted that arm perfectly. Now work on the face. I'm also going to be sipping my coffee. That's a given. I guess I don't have to sip it right into the microphone. Brave Heroes, the Path of the Wandering Monk Hero Collection character expansion for HeroQuest was revealed at Gen Con this year. And what a response. The monk, which I've talked about extensively on this channel already, which others have talked about extensively on their channels and in Discord servers and the like extensively, has a wildly different set of mechanics that really contribute to a brand new playstyle or set of playstyles for HeroQuest. This is awesome. Some people have criticized it as being too complex or too OP or not scalable enough. And some people have criticized the design of the monk, which is aesthetically based in a very generalized Far Eastern setting. You can tell because of the martial artist stance of the male-presenting monk and the actual clothing of the female-presenting monk. They are quite Eastern-based in appearance, just judging by their art and their sculpts. The Far Eastern setting from which they hail is inferred with the literature that comes with the Hero Collection and on a map that is included as well. And we get to see kind of a peek into the greater world of the contemporary HeroQuest. Now, there have been critiques against both the mechanics and the appearance of the monk, as well as the monk class itself. Class is not a term used with HeroQuest, but it is a term that I use because it means the same thing, whether you are applying it to a game like Dungeons & Dragons, where it is part of the mechanical terminology, or HeroQuest, which doesn't use words like classes, and yet each hero that you can choose from is a class because you create your hero and play it the way that you want after you have chosen it. But I realize they're not the exact same thing. I'm just using class in its own superclass sense of the word. I think we're going to see a lot more of those criticisms up to and beyond the release of the monk in January of next year. And I'm here to say they're fine. Those people aren't necessarily wrong. Now, just because I'm saying they're not wrong doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with them. I'm not saying that the monk doesn't belong in HeroQuest. In fact, I don't think that anybody can tell you what belongs or does not belong in HeroQuest. And the reason that I think that is because all of us who play the game, are very different from one another. We may have a lot of similarities, but we are all potentially going to have a different approach to the game, different reasons for playing the game, different things to take away from the game, whether that's the sense of fun when hanging out with friends or the bit of a reward that comes with the dopamine release after you kill an orc, or if you are Zargon, destroying the barbarian and humiliating him in front of his heroic friends. That's the sort of thing that kind of divides us a little bit, but it's something that we can all respect out of one another. We're all here to support the same thing in various ways. I like to make videos and talk my head off about the different parts of HeroQuest and how it relates to other games. You might like to play the game live on Twitch. You might like to review the components in great detail and talk about whether the mechanics have strayed too far into the realm of complexity these days. Things like that, these are all great ways to support the game, as well as, of course, buying them. But in the face of those criticisms, I have seen some very good counterpoints as well, including the one that I quoted to start the video off. And I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here and say that the counterpoints are absolutely valid. They're a great way to kind of get someone grounded who may be immediately hating this class or not wanting to give it a chance, and kind of remind them about the origins of the class itself, where the headspace of the designers or creators might have been when they introduced it, and why it can belong in your predominantly based in Western medieval fantasy game. There's going to be opinions on both sides, and I would love to hear yours no matter which side it falls on, so please comment down below anything you like about what you support or don't prefer about this Monk addition to our beloved game. I've seen a lot of critique about the mechanics mainly. Mechanics, and really they're not anything bad, just like the people who don't like the appearance don't say anything bad. It's just a critique, observation. That's why I say they're absolutely valid, and I fully support folks if they don't think that this belongs, as well as those folks who think that it does belong. There are potentially as many ways to perceive HeroQuest as there are players of the game, and it's not right for any one of us to try to overwrite the thinking of any other person and their perspective of the game, how they should perceive it, anything like that. For people who think that the monk doesn't belong in their game, they are simply right. And for those that think the monk does belong in their game, they are simply right. This is an easy topic. It's pretty low-hanging fruit. When I did the channel split, I decided the coffee drinking ASMR should come over to the AshQuest side. So there's a lot of folks who just prefer Western fantasy. I'm one of them. I actually prefer my role-playing games to be deeply rooted in Western fantasy. I love dragons, goblins. I love the medieval European settings, or those settings that are based in that European medieval setting. I love knights. I love the hierarchy of kingdoms and monarchies, things like that in my games. But as a game player and hobbyist game designer, even I know that these games, these fantasies, if they are to scale, then they can't just do the same thing over and over and over again. They have to scale outward. They have to scale deeper, upward, beyond. Now, there are a multitude of ways that they can do that. There are a lot of places to go from Western fantasy. You can go from there to steampunk. Suddenly, you've encountered a race of dwarves that are piloting steam-powered, crude sort of suits that are able to walk on two legs. They're using levers to control giant claws that are moving boulders out of their way with ease. It seems that the dwarves have developed a new way to mine. Or perhaps gnomes. The tinkering gnomes have constructed a zeppelin, a crazy device that defies the laws of physics by floating in the air, carrying with it a multitude of traveling passengers. These are some of the ways that we can introduce steampunk fantasy into our game. You could even have trains. Trains. That was all. I was just going to say trains there. That was it. That was supposed to sell you on the idea of steampunk. Anyway, trains. Trains are awesome. Now, you could go deeper, and I mean down. There's a few things down below. There are multitudes of caves that could be inhabited by rat men of indeterminate IP origin and vague copyright status, as long as you don't call them by specific names, that are just craven in nature. That when you roll to save against them, your dice are not going to be saving you. To escape their wrath, their chittering horde of an empire would be like going to a haven. I'm sorry. Look, as a father, it's my right, privilege, and civic duty to use puns or rhymes or any other stupid manner of joke as much as possible. You could go even deeper and uncover a race of lizard people. That would be actually based in reality because, the lizard people exist. Mark Zuckerberg is down there somewhere. Perhaps a chasm opens in the earth and hordes of demons, a legion of flying gargoyle-like entities come out. There's your big bad right there. Just the devil. You could set sail on the open seas. You could have an entire pirate theme. There have always been craven folk on the water who will take what you have, destroy you, and ask questions never. And what a multitude of mechanics you could introduce if you went that direction. Going across the seas, piloting a ship, commandeering a fleet, using cannons, raiding other ships, stopping in at islands, doing dungeons to collect booty, getting back on the ship and sailing away. Mutiny. Now that we're on the water, we can expand our game by going deeper. I mean, sinking way deep. We can get into the deep seas and the eldritch abominations that lurk below. We don't even have to go into the water to summon the eldritch. We can just do that in the cities with the cultists. We've already got an avenue there. All you need is a book and a magic phrase. Still other Western-based fantasies want to go upwards into the sky, and perhaps we have sky islands. There's all kinds of things you can do, including going into space, which is bizarrely what some people choose not to do with the existing property, but rather make a duplicate of the property. Oh, I made Elfland Quest. That was a Western fantasy game. It's time to make Elfland Quest in space. It's the same game, but it has spaceships, and you'll spend more money on it. So why go to the far east of all places? If some people want to retreat into their Western fantasy to relive the games of their childhood that may not have had the Far Eastern elements, then so be it. That's great. That I don't think there's a valid critique that exists that should be able to shut that down because it's just a matter of preference. On the other hand, there's going to be people that talk about the Eastern explicit references in Dungeons and Dragons as well as Warhammer. I mean, in Warhammer, there's a literal place just called Nippon, which is the Japanese word for Japan. It doesn't get more explicit than that. It's literally just Japan with orcs. Okus. Goburin. And in Dungeons and Dragons, we have all kinds of Eastern-based classes. Don't we? We've got the monk. Do we have ninjas? Do we have samurai? Whatever. Final Fantasy is an example of a Western-based role-playing game, a video game series in this case, which starts off very Western medieval and then eventually brings in job classes such as samurai and ninja. These two classes are prevalent in the Final Fantasy franchise. They almost always make an appearance. Almost every Final Fantasy game starts off in this lovely forest, castle, lake, dragon, cave, goblins setting that I have come to know and love and that so many of us have come to be so comfortable with, and travels your character across vast and various biomes, including the desert, the Northlands, and then, at some point, an eastern place where people dress a little bit differently and have slightly more respectful customs and slightly harder-hitting fists. And this is fine, too, because it is a choice, and if you like that kind of stuff, it is a preference. At the end of the day, though, we are talking about HeroQuest. We're not playing Final Fantasy. We're not playing Warhammer. We're not playing Dungeons and Dragons. We're playing HeroQuest. So the points that I offer at the beginning of the video, which are based on a post, which by the way, I'm supportive of that post. I'm not making this video against it. I'm not trying to destroy anybody with facts and logic. I'm just here to offer counterpoints to those points. The original HeroQuest, the one that made waves, that garnered lasting, almost cult-like influence from so many people, which led to the eventual revival that we are talking about today, did not have an explicit Eastern setting. There was nothing of the sort. Some of you are going to rightfully point out, but HeroQuest is based loosely in the Warhammer fantasy world. This is not the same as an explicit reference. The word loosely is key here. There are things that separate it. It's almost like a fork. You don't need to understand cryptocurrency. Sorry, it's a bad word. I hope I don't get demonetized for that. Or etymology to understand forking. Forking is just, we agree on how this is going to work until we don't. At which point, my version and your version can coexist. And if they coexist, they've simply been forked. They're equally valid. It is what it is. Those forks can go on to become other forks. They do have real-world application in the terms that I mentioned, but sticking to HeroQuest. Obviously, HeroQuest was loosely based in the Warhammer Fantasy world for a variety of reasons. The miniatures were already there. It was a game that was easier to set up and play than anything Warhammer-based and less costly. The lore was already kind of there. It was just super easy to draw certain vague parts and create this new bubbled universe. And so there's not really an explicit connection between the two. There are some races that get shared. There's the notion of chaos magic. These things are implicit. They are inferences. They are hints. And it's no less valid for somebody to come along and be like, yeah, those are Famir, but they're HeroQuest Famir, not Warhammer Famir. And also, I know the sculpts are the same. Don't at me with the sculpts. There's actually a lot of sculpts in the Warhammer side that are so different from the mono lizards we have in HeroQuest. So don't bring up the sculpts. You may have similarities on the map as well, because barbarians, of course, are from the northern area, and the chaos wastes are over here, and the map is really close to that of a Warhammer map. But do we ever actually use any of the locations explicitly? The answer might actually be surprisingly yes in a few small instances. But my point is, I don't consider HeroQuest to be part of Warhammer. To me, HeroQuest is, especially now that it's been revived and is owned by a different company, its absolute own universe. There are similarities between the two. There are little hints, there are little handshakes here and there, but there's nothing that says, yes, HeroQuest is Warhammer. It is classically a Games Workshop product. It's going to have that style. It's going to have the aiming at kids. It's going to have simplicity because the creators of it wanted it to be a game for people who want to play Dungeons and Dragons but don't want to learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And those people are talking about me. I'm exactly that person. The game is also not Dungeons and Dragons. You could say that it wouldn't exist without Dungeons and Dragons, and I think that that's probably fine, probably valid. The creators have gone on to say very similar things, paraphrasing here with the quote that I gave a little earlier, because I don't remember the exact wordage. It's very possible that it wouldn't exist without Dungeons and Dragons. It's also quite possible that it would, because somebody might have based it on Warhammer. But for those who don't want to play Warhammer, that was Warhammer Quest, but that had iterations too. HeroQuest is quite an earlier iteration of what could be forked off and wildly conceived at a stretch to be Advanced HeroQuest and then Warhammer Quest. The games are fundamentally different, wildly so, but you could still say, well, that's a path that it could have been on if it wasn't based on D&D, if D&D didn't exist. And yeah, I mean, even D&D has its own things that it draws inspiration from. Those aren't necessarily relevant points unless your goal is to say that a version of D&D was going to exist no matter what. I actually do kind of think that that is the case. I think rock would have existed even if blues didn't exist. I think that we would have just seen the style come into play with a different context. That's a bold claim. That probably doesn't belong on this podcast. That's probably way too hot of a take. I do not want people arguing with me about blues and rock in the comments. What am I doing? Must be time for a coffee refill. So yeah, half a century ago, we had the monk introduced. That doesn't mean that the monk belongs in every Western fantasy, but if the monk belongs in the Western fantasy that is being recreated, readopted, re-released by an enterprising company that sees that passion and wants to run the game with that same passion as players of that game, as fellow fans who are fueled by the excitement that comes from joining together and playing that game, then so be it. The Far East and its styles, and especially the mechanics of the monk, don't exist in original HeroQuest, and it's fine to say I'm a purist and I don't think the monk should be in this game as it's presented here. It is fine to say that. And it is just as fine to say, but it is now and it's canon, and we should be welcoming of that because it means more HeroQuest. I specifically don't want to call out the monk for not belonging, and I don't specifically call out the monk for not belonging. I will admit that the Far East aesthetic is not my preference. I would love to just stay in the Western fantasy, but I'm all about Avalon Hill showing us the world that they have crafted for the revival of our game, and I'm all about supporting and playing through all of that, so I will do that regardless. And unless we go to space. Let's not go to space, Avalon Hill. I don't want to go to space. You could release a HeroQuest space system, completely separate, canonical. I would probably go with that, but I am really getting off topic. The reason that I won't call out the monk as not belonging is because every single hero beyond the original 4 has been called out as not belonging in HeroQuest or not being a part of HeroQuest. All of them. They've all been called out. These are like quantum valid claims. They're neither completely valid 100% of the time, nor are they completely invalid. They all have a place within the minds of the players who are supporting the game. I've heard about these criticisms with the orc. And while I absolutely love the bard class, the bard archetype, and I love when I can play as a bard, I do understand why people critique the bard presented in HeroQuest. I do understand why people say, this is wrong, this doesn't belong. And so I can't say that either side is completely definitively right. The druid has been called out because of design and people also just generally not liking that the name of the hero is using a class name. That was one of the complaints. It's also the same with the rogue. With the rogue, people were really concerned about HeroQuest becoming Dungeons and Dragons. There was some kind of set of statements on the matter that I don't think were really that well thought out. There continues to be criticism today comparing the game with Dungeons and Dragons and its classes. I don't think that this is well thought out. I'm sure it's valid on some level, but I really think a lot more thought needs to be put into articulating what exactly people mean when they are complaining about the similarities in the concept of class. Now, I may be the world's #1 HeroQuest Warlock fan. My darling Warlock has been a favorite character since I got the Mythic tier version of HeroQuest. I will fight you for this title. But even I can understand people's problems with the Warlock. I can't say that the Warlock definitively, objectively belongs in HeroQuest other than my games because I understand she has an agreement with a dark entity. Not everybody is going to think that that's heroic. Then there's the Knight, which is the most baffling one of all. Some folks think that the appearance of a knight is somehow counter to the lack of monarchy hierarchies in the original HeroQuest, when it is very clear that a king tasks you with many of the quests that you go on in the game, and there are various knights that are referenced throughout the game as well, including a certain Sir Traitor. I also think it's a bit bizarre because if you watch Jordan Sorcery's fantastic video on HeroQuest, you'll see that a knight was prototyped to be included with the playable heroes of the base classic game. You can't get more classic than that. You can't get more belongs in HeroQuest than that. And yet, because it ultimately wasn't included, I do understand why people don't like the knight. Those that don't, anyway. So I guess the reason that I want to make this video at all is just to kind of spread the awareness on both sides of the argument and just ensure that people realize it's okay to have a preference. It's not okay to tell someone else what their preference should be or that what belongs or doesn't belong in their game. It's perfectly okay for you to say what belongs and doesn't belong in your game. And of course, you could do whatever you want. I'm not telling anybody what to do, just how to process and prepare for what I think is going to happen a lot in the coming months. Speaking to the trend of naming your class archetypes after existing class archetypes, people have been doing that for decades on the old inn, and nobody really calls out each other for doing it. So I kind of get confused on why people would critique a company for doing it when that company is made up of the same nerds who go on the old inn to talk about their homebrew and how excited they are that they've created this character and how fun they are to play. So I won't even have to touch that topic beyond that statement. Come on. Once we start seeing owlbears in HeroQuest, that's when I'll let you get worried. There's a bunch of people who have homebrewn HeroQuest monsters with Dungeons & Dragons monsters. I've seen beholders, I've seen mimics. Everybody loves mimics. Mimics are awesome, but that is a very Dungeons & Dragons creation. So it stands to reason that we are doing the same things we are criticizing Avalon Hill for doing. I don't see the logic in that. So just some awareness there. All right. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'd love to hear your interpretations of what's going on in the comments below, how you perceive the aesthetic. You can absolutely homebrew your own monk to be Western styled and use the same set of abilities. You can absolutely use the Eastern style, but use the 3 ability truncated system where you spend 1 and it's gone for the quest. It might be a lot of fun to homebrew your monks that way. And once I get my own copy of the monk, we'll talk about different ways to homebrew them. I realize I could proxy and do it now, but it's much more fun to do it with the official release. So in about, 4 months, you'll see that from me. But hey, that's a promise. Look forward to it. Thank you very much for watching. Comment anything you like down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Until next time, onward, brave heroes.